fruitful the exchange taking place here is from the fact that part of my work relates to research done by Dr. Nölde. As we've seen already in Birgit Hoffmann's paper, Iranian travelogues make a great subject. At face value, they may be taken as mines of information on outlying regions and as testimonials to connectivity. In the context of modernizing trends of the 19th century, they are typically read as products of imperial serving projects, and the papers Birgit has presented point in that direction. Within this framework, however, there is some difference of opinion as to their exact function. Was their production driven by ideas of inclusion and reclamation, or did they project evolving political boundaries? That's the end I'm going to come out at in the course of this paper. Finally, there is the tendency to place travelogues within the context of global developments. Here, the worldwide expansion of early modern frontiers of settlement, I'm quoting John F. Richard here, and the material encounters across the desert and the zone are evocative themes. Typically, travel narratives produce a connection between the place of departure, the destination, and the eventual return. The narratives are structured by the logical sequence of the itinerary, that is, the stages passed through en route and the intervening terrain. They serve to enumerate facts that are produced and connected with each other by the movement of the author and thus a protagonist of the report. So at face value, the 5 19th century travelers to Khorasan's frontier that figure in an article that I've recently published in Eurasian Studies may be understood as icons of connectivity. After all, they went places. Mirza Reza, Mirza Naqasi, Mohandas Bashi, Muhammad Ali Khan Ghaffur, and Reza Quli Khan Hidayat were sent on official missions to Kheiwa in 1839-40, 1842, and 1851. From 1877 to 1879, Abdullah Qaragozlu served as the commander of the border guard of the Qajar garrison at Saras. Finally, Mirza Reza Khan Nölde served as interpreter with the Perso-Russian Boundary Commission from roughly 1883 to 1887. The focus of my paper will be on the 3 travelers that actually made it to Kheiwa. One concern that I have with the way the term connectivity is often handled is that physical movement and exchange tends to be taken as an end in itself. More often than not, it is adduced to underpin a contrastive argument. At stake seems to be a supposed dichotomy of isolation versus globalization. Any evidence whatsoever of trading activities or movements of scholars and pilgrims is understood to rebut competing notions of remoteness, stagnation, and decline. The buzzword here is contact zone. For instance, in his article on Reza Quli Khan Hidayat, Arash Kazimi places the Qajar rulers in a shared place in the northeast, which is defined by their interaction with the Turkmens, who in turn engage in slave trade, pastoralism, and pilgrimage to Naqshbandi shrines. More recently, Robert Cruz has championed the cause of Afghan globalism as opposed to the notion of Afghanistan as a hermit kingdom, highlighting a seemingly constant and far-flung circulation of people, commodities, and books since medieval times. Cruz projects an ongoing dynamic of exchange and thus a homogeneous flow towards modernity. This approach assumes the existence of discrete and stable entities that connected with the outside world over time. Whether intended or not, it creates the impression that modern infrastructures and means of transportation inject novel ideas and spread them evenly and inexorably. By the same token, the focus on cosmopolitan networks privileges the strata of society that get around. The idea apparently being that their experiences abroad automatically percolate down to their fellow countrymen. In my view, this argumentation glosses over the fact that the intensification and acceleration of communication in modern times coincided with new and acutely felt peripheries. It thus creates a zero-sum game, while the narrative frame for the depiction of connectedness as opposed to marginality and isolation is tilted towards the former. The two fields continue to be cast in a contrastive manner. When it comes to the relationship between the Qajar rulers and the Khans of Khiva, I have gained the impression that the developments of the 19th century changed the political demarcations and brought forth new peripheries. But depending on the vantage point, it will also be seen that new alignments came into being. I will attempt to capture the changing political and conceptual mid-19th century landscape by reading the travelogues against the canvas of their political context. Authorial and, by extension, imperial strategies need to be understood against the background of immediate political concerns and the nature of Qajar presence in the region. Despite Qajar claims to the opposite, the travelogues document a process of contraction and disentanglement rather than a sustained drive into the steppes, as has been, for instance, assumed by Khazani. For most of the 19th century, Qajar influence of the region east of Mashhad and north of Astarabad remained tenuous. The town of Sarakhs, let's see if I can find it. There we go. Briefly occupied by the Crown Prince Abbas Mirza Naib Sultani in 1832, only became an Iranian possession in 1859. Until then, Muzduran, an army post located at the top of a pass halfway between Mashhad and Sarakhs, was considered the limit, the Sarhad of Khorasan. For the travelers setting out from Astarabad, crossing the Atrak River implied leaving the Qajar governor's realm. Just to, point to future developments, the Atrak River and then sort of the northeastern limit of the Qubit Bahr came to form the actual border of Iran. So what these people perceive in the 1840s and 50s actually turned out to be political borders in the long run. While the Iranian envoys discussed here did not yet anticipate the delimitation of these borders in the 1880s, concrete ideas of individual points of entry to and exit from Central Asia did exist at the time. In several senses, the travelogues charted the decoupling of Khiva and Iran well before the Russian invasion of Central Asia. On their way to Khiva, all three envoys are acutely aware that they are leaving familiar terrain soon after setting out from Astarabad or Mashhad. A sense of remoteness and forlornness hovers over their missions. After weathering the gruesome passage through the Karakum Desert, yeah, Kheiwa somewhere up here, their encounter with everything Khivan breathes alienation. This sense of estrangement experienced by the envoys contrasts with formal claims to entitlement exhibited by the Iranian government. This phenomenon is most pronounced with Hidayat, who infuses his report with local sights and sounds with a sense of Iranianateness, and thus transforms time-honored spatial concepts into building blocks for a nascent nationalist argumentation. A case in point is his historiographical excursus on Kheiwa. He cast the Khanate as an integral component of a timeless and stable entity of Iran. Hidayat identifies Khorazm as a domain, mul, located on this side of the Oxus, belonging to the regions of Khorasan and Iran, Vilayat Khorasan by Iran. Delving into the mythical beginnings of Iranian history, he traces its name to a military encounter between Iran and Turan, which the victorious Khosrow referred to as a minor battle, Khwarazmi. Finally, he once again highlights the region's embedment in Iran by stating that it adjoined Marv, Astarabad, and Saras. What is more, he constructs a clear political hierarchy and assigns a position of servile loyalty to the Kumunat Khans. According to his portrayal, it was the disobedience of the then Khivan ruler Muhammad Amin Khan that occasioned his mission. This grand narrative of entitlement contrasts with the weakness the Iranian travelers experienced in situ. For the first traveler, Mirza Reza Mizan Abbasi, the journey to Kheiwa constituted the low point of his career. Between 1815 and 1819, he had been part of a delegation sent to England by Abbas Mirza to study the new sciences. This mission has been mentioned in several of the presentations we've heard so far. An expert for the construction of military fortifications, he had participated in Muhammad Shah Qajar's campaign to Herat in 1837-38, and later went on to draw the construction plan for the Dawud Funun. Whatever little we know about this mission we owe to the hosts of today's Congress, Sayyid Ali Mujani, who had access to his travelogue and wrote an article on the subject in 1991. Mirza Reza repeatedly complains that his mission was not even backed properly by his Qajar overlords. He reports that the governor of Astarabad felt that not even a fully equipped mission could make it through the adjoining Turkmen territory. And here I quote the governor: "If I send you off with pomp, you will be taken captive as soon as you venture 2 farsakh out of camp. This would cast a bad name on our government. Yet, if you travel on byways, accompanied by 2 Turkmen guides, this will not constitute an embassy." Quite to the contrary, Mirza Reza feels that the only way the Qajar government can make headway among the Turkmens is to impress them with splendid missions. In his opinion, the Iranian presence compares poorly with the representatives active on behalf of England and Russia. He says, if such expenses are futile, why then do the English and Russian governments spend huge sums of money on their ambassadors and other travelers? The people of this region are all greedy. and they are fixated on rewards and presents. The Turkmen's intellect resides in their eyes. Were they to see an empowered, glamorous, pleasant, and high-minded ambassador, they would take to him and become more obedient. While Mirza Reza didn't make it to Khiva under great hardships, his interaction with the court was guided by caution, or as later writers put it, by lack of interest. Alapuli Khan afterwards noted that his behavior compared favorably with that of his successor Muhammad Ali Khan Ghaffur, as he, quote, minded his own business. Hidayat, on the other hand, cited other reasons for Mirza Reza's light footstep in Khiva. He contrasts the latter's drinking and womanizing with the respect he himself commanded on account of his dignified conduct and his great erudition. The stated aim of Mirza Reza's mission was to inform the Khan of Khiva of an impending Russian campaign against Khiva, which was indeed launched in 1840-41. His mission demonstrates the weakness of the Iranian presence on the eastern border. It is also noteworthy that his embassy was apparently not concerned with slave raiding and dealing, an issue that was to constitute a core concern of the following two missions. The official Iranian embassies conducted to Khiva in 1842 and 1841 and Bukhara in 1844 aimed at reversing the unlawful enslavement of Shiite Muslims taken captive during raids on Khorasan. Qajar sources generally refer to the abducted Iranians as asir, captives, in contradistinction to bande, baide, slave. While taking prisoners was a routine aspect of all military exchanges of the time, the protest of the Iranian government focused on the sale and enslavement of these prisoners. The Khivan government, on its part, played on both meanings. One line of reasoning categorized the slaves as prisoners that needed to be ransomed either by exchange of prisoners or the payment of money. The exchange of prisoners was an unlikely scenario, owing to the high proportion of Iranian captives in Khiva. Muhammad Ali Khan Ghaffur estimated that there were 30,000 Iranians in Khiva, but only 50 to 60 Khivans in Iran at the time of his mission. The second line of Khivan reasoning rested on the declaration of Shiites as unbelievers and their inclusion among those groups that could be properly enslaved, that is, non-Muslims captured in war and children born to slaves. From the Iranian point of view, the latter argumentation constituted a direct attack on the state religion and hence the legitimacy of the Qajar government. It is in this light that Hidayat's well-publicized attempt to retrieve Iranian slaves and to achieve a ban on slave trade is to be read. The third line of reasoning offered by the Khivan government classified slave raiding as an independent economic activity by the local tribal leadership, both Turkmen and Khorasani, which bore no relationship to the central governments of Khiva and Tehran. Implying fuzzy spheres of influence and overlapping territorial claims, this contention approximated political realities but ran counter to the notion of entitlement to clearly bounded territories, which was advanced by both parties in the course of the negotiations. So I return to the list of authors. Both Ghaffur and Hidayat focused on the restitution of Iranians taken captive by Turkmens and resold in Khiva. Although both envoys assumed a condescending stance towards the Khanate, they did not achieve their goal of attaining the release of their enslaved compatriots. The line of argument adopted by Muhammad Ali Khan Ghaffur and Reza Quli Khan Hidayat was logic but unrealistic. While the Iranian envoys sought to achieve the abolition of illegal enslavement, it was well nigh impossible to reclaim the individuals that had been transformed into sale items. While Ghaffur began his negotiations in Kheiva with maximal demands, he asked for the restitution of all Iranian captives and the prohibition of slave trade. He eventually returned to Iran empty-handed. Hidayat, on his part, was accompanied by an unspecified number of Iranians whose exact status, ransomed or manumitted, is not mentioned. The two Iranian envoys sensed the great distance separating their concerns from those of the Kheivan court. Ghaffur reacted with contempt. He openly accused his hosts of temporizing and dismissed their arguments as inconsistent. This breach of etiquette was followed by a similar breach on the Kheivan side. There were rumors of his impending execution or assassination. Hidayat, on the other hand, strove to portray his influence at the Kheivan court in a golden light. He felt that the Khan was much taken with the erudition he displayed in a number of impromptu lectures on the excellence of the Qajari lineage, Iran's territorial heritage, its scientific and military achievements, and central to the issue of slavery, the history of Islam and its various sects. He also informed Muhammad Amin Khan on the routes to Khwarezm, as well as the saintly graves in the region. Finally, reciting the poetry of two great sons of the region, Najmuddin Kubra and Pahlavan Mahmud Khwarazmi, Hidayat graciously treated the Khan to essential knowledge about his own realm, and thus once again established his superiority. Hidayat's intellectual grasp over Kheiva's past and present fit into the construction of the deeply Iranian terrain, a sort of Shahnameh land, which provided the conceptual framework for Qajar territorial claims. At the same time, this sense of entitlement collided with the remoteness and forlornness Hidayat and the other travelers experienced on their missions. Grand historical and territorial claims thus figured as a laborious counter-narrative to an ongoing process of political disassociation. At first sight, the gaps in communication the Iranian envoys experienced were not often of a linguistic nature. Turki and Persian formed part of the linguistic repertoire of the Kheivan and Qajar representatives. The samples of the correspondence appended to Ghaffur's travelogue indicate that Persian was the medium of written communication. For Hidayat, the choice of the language of negotiation was a matter of prestige. His audience with Muhammad Amin Khan was conducted with the help of an interpreter, as neither the Khan nor the Iranian envoy would admit that they understood the language of their counterpart. The Iranian envoy presents the decision to speak either language as a matter of conscious choice. While Hidayat knew some Turki, the Khan of Kheiva had a command of Persian. The Khan's preference for Chagatai is also apparent from the letter that he addressed to Nasruddin Shah at the conclusion of Hidayat's mission. The snapshot offered by Hidayat highlights the shrinking role and reach of Persian as a lingua franca. Yuri Bregel has noted that both Persian and Chagatai were used for official purposes up to the 1850s. Deeds of sale in Kheiva were written in Persian until 1857, when Persian was completely abandoned for Chagatai. The decision to use Chagatai implied a shift in medium rather than textual format. From the early 19th century, the Congregaduras encouraged the translation of Persian historiography into Turkey. Case in point is the Rosatu Safa, originally a work by the 15th century author Mir Khan, which came back to life in the 19th century, both in Kheiva and Iran. After his return from his mission to Kheiva, Hidayat published a 3-volume sequel on the occasion of the 10th anniversary of Nasiruddin Shah's reign. Yet already 40 years earlier, the Kheivan poet and courtier Shir Muhammad Munis had begun to translate this very work to Chagatai under the auspices of the Kheivan Khans Muhammad Rahim I and Alaf Quli Khan. The encounters between Qajar and Kheivan officials around the middle of the 19th century thus suggest a sort of connectivity that goes beyond the mere assumption that people, goods, and texts circulate and interact with one another. Nor should one presuppose a specific scale for the study of connectivity. While it is necessary to identify and explore what Massey has called vantage points, or, in the words of Francesco Orsini, significant geographies, the point is not to play off the analysis of microregions against regional or global approaches. What is at stake, though, is the depiction of how spaces are integrated on the basis of social, political, and historical processes. These processes are not necessarily congruent, and they occur with differential speeds, as is demonstrated by the last example of textual continuity and elaboration against a background of linguistic and political fragmentation. In sum, the travelogues discussed here indeed point to distinct dynamics and strategies. While Hidayat seeks to foster the idea of an Iranian notion by insisting on a historical topography frozen in time, the vernacularization in Kheiva opened up a shared literary orbit to the Muslims residing in the Russian Empire. The void the Iranian envoys experienced thus was not merely occasioned by the desert they had to cross on their way to Kheiva. Thank you very much.
Thanks for this lecture, and now we have now, so to say, plenty of minutes for discussion. Please.
I have a question for Kристine. You mentioned in your travelogues the political borders between Iran, Iran and Kheiva. From the state point of view, do we also know something about the impact of these political borders on, let's say, trade or movement of people not related to the state? The interaction of in this border region?
Yeah. I mean, the points of entry and exit I mentioned, they are really points. We don't have a sense of a borderline yet. But using the trade routes, you have to go, through. You have to pass through these points, and they were embattled. So the sense of threat is real. For instance, the garrison of Mosduran, which was a small garrison, guards were sent out every night to sweep the pass to see, to make a sort of inventory. So the next morning they could go and look how many tracks there were, and they knew how many people had gone by without them noticing, So there is this sort of informal trade, slave trade, is flourishing at this time under the Russian occupation. But, within this narrative of decline, which is a factor in the 19th century, I think one should also, be aware of the background noise, that's a phrase from Herman Purcell, of constant economic activity. And we see that Marv goes back and forth between Qajar and Khidm interests, and at issue is the control of the trade route towards Bukhara. So even if trade diminishes, we still see there is enough going on for this, to fight over this region.
May I just myself add something on this mild question? In my view, the interesting point is, as far as I remember, the last government that was designed for Mao must have been a certain Bahrami's or something like that, yes, in the 30s, in the early 30s, yes, and there was no more Iranian, no more Iranian government sent from Tehran or appointed from Tehran to Mao. So the problem is that in my view, that was the period of coming into existence of two levels of, let's say, of different discourses. One was the realistic discourses of what is Persia, what is Iran. And in this discourse, at the time of Reza Khori Khan Hedayat already, yes, Marv, the area of Rav, everything north to Saras, was not anymore really conceived mentally as belonging to Iran. But there was a second discourse, maybe a historistic or ideological discourse, and that was the discourse of Qajar power. And this refers to Iran, and this goes back via Reza Khori Khan to the concepts of Khorasan written by Hafiz Abru and so on. And Reza Khori Khan supports the Hidayat, he supports this secondary, this so to say, this imperial, the imperial concept very strongly. But in fact, as you read the subtext of these envoys who went to Khیوا, or the other one who went to Bukhara as well, so you find immediately whenever they leave the area of Saras, they feel themselves totally in a foreign area, practically. Practically, you understand, we are living now under aliens, immediately. So that almost, they could talk to them in Persian or this and that, could communicate, that was not a problem. So the interesting point is that the final fixation, the final revelation of the Iranian then Russian border, which is described by Alfadoleh, this was not perceived, Alfadoleh gives it himself, that was not perceived as an oppressive measure by a colonialist power, by an expansive colonial power, that it was simply the acceptance, the final acceptance of something which one generation earlier had already been accepted by common people themselves. But the problem is that those people who identify themselves with the Qajar rulers in our times, which means members of the Qajar family or so, whenever you tell them the word Marv, they get chuckled like that and say, oh, Marv, that was a great hit against our grandeur. Still they have that in their mind. And this is a very interesting thing, because it has something to do with the passover of traditional imperial conception and modern and the coming into the modern nationalist concepts of Iran, which actually became much more got loosened from the idea of what was the imperial Bumi earlier to what Iran actually is.
Exactly. And under Nölde, the discourse actually turns around because he's made his early career in Tbilisi, you know, and he accompanies Qajar envoys to Russia. So, you know, his ideas of proper civilization are formed by everything Russian. So for him, again, being sent to Khorasan is basically the worst that can happen to him. I mean, he already describes Mashhad as basically the pits. People are so uneducated that they mistake his fashionable haircut for kufr. He must be a heathen if he wears his hair like that. Whereas they don't notice how dirty the hammam is, you know, that sort of thing going on. And during the demarcation of the border, he will take off and go to Ashgabat, which is in Russian hands. And he grows lyrical about the amount of development the Russians have done in Ashgabat, how modern this is, and how much encouragement to trade is given. So in this narrative, present-day Turkmenistan becomes the symbol of advancement, whereas everything on this side, on the Iranian side of the border, is basically not worth the consideration.
No, in many cases he was playing to be a Russian spy, and in my view probably he was, anyway. No. Yes, Oliver Bass.
Yes, I had a question for Kریستینه as well, but I would just like to make a little remark to what Professor Prof said about this obsession with Marx. While this is obviously quite pertinent to note that there is that sense of having lost that area for good, as I will say this afternoon, at the Paris Peace Conference, the Iranians are once again obviously staking out their claims exactly for that area on the other side of the Atrak. And of course, in their maximum program, Marv once again figures as that focal point of we need to get that back. The other point that one could make is perhaps to kind of get an idea of this attitude towards this area. If we look at the concept that was coming up in Russia after the fall of communism, where you have this idea of the near abroad. In a way, these territories are Iran's near abroad. They are not really abroad, but they are also no longer part of the core. But the question that I had for Kریستینه, to what extent these earlier envoys, I'm not talking about Afal-Gule, did they have a sense of belonging to an established bureaucracy of foreign policy making? To what degree did they see themselves as diplomats in the professionalized sense that sort of began to emerge in the 19th century, especially since they had interaction with European countries before, and also, I think, isn't it that Ghafuri, even though he doesn't get much joy with the Iranian prisoners, he helps to get some British out from Kheiwa, or at least tries to play a positive role in it. But to what degree is there a sense of belonging to an established core of professionals?
Well, the travelers themselves would like to be part of such an establishment. Mirza Naqasi's statements basically say, where is the Iranian government in this? I should be equipped, like a proper mission to Kheiwa. With Muhammad Ali Khan Ghafoor and Hidayat, it's very clear that they play their role as envoys to the hilt. And a major issue also with Abbas Quli Khan's mission to Bukhara is prestige. They make a point of entering, their destination properly dressed. I mean, you have to go through the desert. They run out of water on the way, you know. So they're not in good shape, and usually it takes a moment of like recollecting themselves, and with Abbas Quli Khan there's actually a moment where he lists the uniforms taken out of the sanduq, the chests, and how his retinue was dressed up so he could like parade through Bukhara. And with Hidayat, he doesn't spend much time on how many people are accompanying him or anything, but he makes a point of not being treated on a par with the representatives of the other Central Asian regions. When he arrives in August 1851, the Khan is away campaigning in Marv and is gone for 2 months. And Hidayat refuses to meet with his representative because that's what they do to the envoys from Khukkan. He won't have that. And when the Khan comes back, he is summoned to audience. He pretends to be ill because first of all he wants to interview the Khan's physician of what went down in Marv, and then they finally get together. So you see, on Hidayat's part, a very self-conscious effort to represent, the state of Iran to its best. But I don't think that there was a regular setup there. Just as certain people probably were sent off to distribute khilat, others were pretty much appointed, it seems to me, in an impromptu manner to take, on this role, because Hidayat goes back and becomes the supervisor of Darul Funun. So this is not part of a, single set career. So it's one job among others that is done.
Last question.
What struck me by hearing the two talks was that in Buddhist travelogues there seemed to be much more details and observation than what is going on than in the travelogues of
I censor details.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask. The Hidayat and Frankfurt travels, they seem to travel through a white landscape almost, and I just wanted to ask if that was because of the focus of your talk, or if these travelers were still much more functional in their content, or maybe much more ideologized in their content.
Well, yes, I think these three travelogues, they are all written by very young men. I think it's their very first mission they have to absolve, and I think they got really. They had to write it in a special form. They got a catalogue what to deal with, and the second is misses his the expectations because he is so happy with himself and always honored by the locals. He completely forgets to do what he was told, yes, and so they are not, I think these are not very important missions. It's from the very personal entourage of the Shah who sends these young men to do this, and so I think the first one is really the one who did the whole program. It's also the biggest, and the others are rather.
Basically, all three reports should conform to this format. For Hidayat, it's actually mentioned that Amir Kabir gave him instructions what to report on en route. And that's exactly what the other two travelers do. They describe the stations, the fodder available there, some of the political, like local political conditions. So it is part of the surveying project. And of course, as water gets scarce, the notes also get scarcer, but it does not have anything to do with the point of view of the authors. But the big difference is that Hidayat is already an established literateur at the time when he goes to Kheiva. And actually, I mentioned that he writes the sequel to Rosatu Safa after returning. After that, he writes the travelogue, and the two texts are really, they interlace with each other, especially the historical excursuses pretty much are duplicated, in both texts. So this report really stands out because it has a propagandistic agenda and is addressed to a much wider public than just the inner court circles.
Thank you very much. So, before we enter now, coffee break, tea break, whatever it is, I would just hope to announce that the following session will be postponed for roughly about 10 minutes or something like that. So the next session, instead of 11:40, is then received to start. Maybe the last remark that comes to my mind is about 40 years ago that I wondered about the fact whether white people eat this kind of television, but the internal game was what